This is a Going Back, Remembering UGA interview, and today, March 26, 2013, we are visiting with Professor John Kehoe, the founder of the University of Georgia's Cortona Study Abroad program, and his wife, Ms. Marilyn Kehoe. We are seated in the Kehoe's lovely home on Woodlawn Avenue in Athens, Georgia, only a short distance from the University of Georgia campus. Others joining us today are Alex Morawski, a friend and colleague of the Kehoes, Alice Vernon of our Going Back crew, and our talented and stalwart videographer, Bill Evelyn. Your interviewer is Fran Lane. We've been really looking forward to this, both of you. And Professor Kehoe, we're looking forward to hearing your recollections on the development of the Cortona program, but I understand that you led a very rich and full life prior to coming to Athens, and I wondered if you would tell us a little bit about your early life.
Well, I taught at the University of North Carolina before coming to Athens, and that was a valuable experience because not only could I teach, but also do my sculpture, and I happened to find a co-ed who was available to me and became my wife, Marilyn, here.
And I made a B, not an A.
But she was also a very talented artist in her own right, so we shared a lot of things together, especially when we traveled. We'd always head for whatever museum or gallery that was worth visiting, so that tied a lot together.
What a lovely honor, Marilyn, that for his early life, you were the first thing he thought of.
His life didn't start till he met me, it sounds like. I think she meant go back a little earlier than that.
Jack, talk to me a little bit. I've done a little research and done some spying on your earlier life, and I know you grew up in Michigan.
Detroit.
Is that right? And went to Wayne State University.
Yes, ma'am.
Played football there?
Yes, ma'am.
What was that experience like?
Well, it was tough because keep in mind at that time all the veterans were coming back from World War II, and these guys were 30 years old. I mean, playing up against a tackle that was 34 years old and weighed at 275 pounds was an experience for a kid my age and my size. But anyways, it was a wonderful experience, and of course we were a small school, had a limited schedule, but we did have a game with Michigan State, which was part of the Big Ten at that time, and that's probably the more fearsome experience that I've ever had in football.
You were glad to finish that one. You were glad to hear the closing bell on that one?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Well, now tell me how a fellow that played football at Wayne State University ended up becoming a sculptor.
Well, it's a long heritage. My father was a very skilled craftsman, especially in wood. So there were always tools around. And I think that's the beginning. When you have a tool, whatever, even a file or any kind of instrument, you start playing with it. And playing leads to thinking about what you're playing with and for. And so I would just shape little odds and ends just to get that experience. And it's both a visual experience, but also very tactile. So that was part of the beginnings then.
When did you know that it was what you wanted to do for your life's work?
Well, Detroit Public Schools had a wonderful program. And if a child indicated any talent, you could go Saturday to the Detroit Institute of Art, and they would have classes there that give you lunch, and you met other children from other schools in the Detroit system. And so that was the beginning of really formalizing any kind of training, because the teachers there were exceptional and dedicated.
So they were supportive of you, and
yeah,
what
absolutely.
a wonderful thing. They need something like that in Detroit now, don't they?
Yes.
Gosh. Merchant Marines, did I understand you traveled the world in the Merchant Marines?
Yeah, I went into the Merchant Marine, and my first trip was on a troop ship. Keep in mind, after World War II, we had a problem because we had captured both German and Italian prisoners in the fighting in Europe and North Africa. They were brought and interned in Canada because they didn't want them to have camps in Europe. So all those prisoners of war had to be returned to their homeland. So this troop ship that I was on, first I went to Northern Europe with all kinds of German prisoners of war, and then the next trip was going to Sicily to return Italian soldiers who were interned, and so they could go back to their homeland. Now that's an experience in itself, because you're almost, since the war was over, there was no hostilities, you got to meet these people. And I, for some reason, gravitated to the Italians. And I think that's where the first taste of desire to go to Italy and see what these folks represented.
Tell how old you were.
17.
Gosh. Jack, what an experience.
Unforgettable.
What an experience. And you know, I'd never thought about returning prisoners to Europe after the Second World War.
That's right. And of course, these folks, these soldiers had no idea what they would find, whether their families would be still there, or their home would still be there. And that's, by the way, the best way to learn a language, because associating with them, you picked up a little bit of Italian, and that served me later on.
Yes, I guess so. What brought your family to the University of Georgia? You were at UNC at Greensboro, is that right?
That's correct.
What brought you all to the University of Georgia?
Well, one name, Lamar Dodd. Lamar, of course, was probably the most prominent contemporary painter or artist and administrator of that time. And so when he invited me to come down here, I jumped at the chance, because moving from a smaller campus with limited possibilities and coming to a major university was a big leap forward.
Well, now, you came here, but at the time that you came, were you aware that we would be looking into study abroad possibilities, or was this just one of those serendipitous things that happened?
It just happened, but earlier when I was teaching in North Carolina, I got a grant to go to Italy, and so Marilyn and I and our family went to Italy, but only for a brief time in the summer. And I knew that that wasn't enough, because we would like to get back there. So that experience, having already lived in Italy, then Lamar, who was also deeply attracted to anything Italian, when I mentioned that to him and a possibility of program, he says, go ahead and find a place. Well, he had a mistake.
He did his sculpture in Rome and cast it in Rome, and we lived in Rome. We knew nothing about these little hill towns at the time.
That's right.
And he was working purely on his work. And that's when he worked in bronze.
Yeah,
No marble.
This little foundry that I worked at was right on the banks of the Tiber River. It was only farmland all alone. And it was the most idyllic place for an artist, because there you could go down to the river and just sort of dream thoughts, and then go back into the studio and create your sculpture. The idea of Cortona, keep in mind at that time, every American program, every American university, always located in a city, either Rome, Florence, or even Milan. Nobody thought of a smaller town. And after living with Marilyn in Rome, we found that the American programs there were isolated. Americans would get together from the different programs. Very few of them would mingle with the Italian people at all. So their experience was limited. They may have studied at the museums and gone to the Vatican and all that, but they didn't get to meet the real Italian people. So at that time, I said, if I ever have the opportunity to start a program, it would be a place where we would be forced by just our environment to meet Italians. And that's true what happened in Cortona.
To get to know the people.
Very few people in Cortona spoke English. And so you had to speak Italian. And of course, the Cortonese were deeply grateful that we had liberated the town. from the German occupation, and they were arms open to Americans. In fact, they even provided two little Italian scholarships for the American students, which showed their deep affection for us.
It was love at first sight. It sounds like. You talk a little bit about that summer that you spent looking for the ideal location.
Well, that was, we still didn't know where we wanted to go, and so I started at Naples, which is south of Rome, and I visited 21 different towns and villages, and trying to find a place. And of course, an art program, a studio art program, needs space. Needs space for painting, for drawing, for sculpture. And we would have to find a place would give us that space and not have to pay for it, because we had no money to start any kind of studio activity. And of all the towns, we had different offers, but Cortona said you can have the top of the opera theater, which is a huge building in the center of town. It had 3 beautiful rooms overlooking the piazza, and they said, here's the key, you take it, and when you leave, give me the key back. So that we had cut the problem of space and money. Remember, that program for over 11 and a half weeks long was $850.
Including airfare.
And this was in 1970, was the first summer that you
Exactly,
all
1970.
Tell some of the towns you looked at and reasons you...
Well, Orvieto is a beautiful town and has a wonderful cathedral, and it has lovely landscape. It's a hill town. But they were not able to provide space.
Plus they had the military.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the Italian, one of the tough mountain regiments in the Italian army was stationed there. And I was thinking, what would they do when they see these Georgia co-eds coming? I mean, we would have another war going on.
And there was an industrial town outside of Rome.
Oh, yeah.
That you looked at.
There were, the towns we looked at were too isolated, because we wanted to be able to get on a bus and go visit the major historical sites, the major museums. And Cortona is right off the autostrada. So you could pop on the autostrada and you could be in Florence in an hour. The other way, you could be in Rome in another hour. So it was just ideally located in terms of travel.
Well, now tell me, I understand that there was a Maestro Giuseppe Favilli, who was your first contact, is that right?
He was the director of tourism, and he was a guy that there was never the word no. It was always yes, see. Anything you asked him for or mentioned to him, there was no problem.
No problem.
No problem. And
he found a crib for our 8-month-old.
And he loved Americans, and anything we needed, we go through him, then he could go through the mayor. That's why we got the space, the studio space, at no charge.
So you started above the Opera House?
Above the Opera House, which is a huge building, 3 wonderful rooms with high ceilings.
If you saw the film Life is Beautiful, that was the theater where El Principessa was in the balcony. They filmed part of that in Cortona.
Well, now, they've built a new center in Cortona, am I right?
Well, it's a renovated, an old building.
Convent or monastery? What was it?
It was an old monastery. And of course, throughout Italy, there are a number of places that have abandoned religious houses. And so this one was a beautiful building that we could have studios, we could sleep students, we could have our own meals there. It was a beautiful site, looked all over the valley below us.
They called it the Albergo Athens, which means the Athens Hotel. And the signs were pointing up, way up the hill.
My understanding was they called it the John. Is that not right?
Well, that was the new. That
else?
was the next building
The
that
new
they
one.
got. Yeah, this was the original one.
What an honor.
The Kehoe Center came later.
Well, you make it sound like such a smooth and wonderful process, and I'm sure that there were some bumps in the road, but it sounds like the connections you made and the relationship that you had with the people there, you were always able to just work it out. Is that right?
Well, the one example I'll give you, spotted Rocky Mountain fever, which doesn't exist in Europe or Italy. We had a student who had gone hiking in the mountains of Georgia and apparently had been bitten by an infected bug, and all of a sudden, after arriving in Italy, this terrible disease happened, and within a couple hours, the local doctors had diagnosed that, had never seen it before, which can be fatal too. So we had, the other thing I think that people should recognize, if illness or accident happens, you want immediate attention by educated doctors. And we had that at Cortona. We had doctors who would never accept payment for their services. They'd say, niente, nothing, go out. We've had acute appendicitis. We even have a baby delivered because a young lady didn't realize it, but she was pregnant and came on the program and had a child delivered. So we had...
Y'all had it all.
You had it all. But again,
tell him we're filming now, please.
The local doctors were wonderful for us.
So it sounds like heaven. It sounds like the idyllic, most wonderful place to be.
There were accidents and there were, problems. We
had broken legs. We had one gal that broke her leg, and it was a compound fracture, and she had a cast on, and her folks kept telling her, come home, you can't go run around Italy with a cast, full-legged cast. She refused.
She was not leaving, huh?
Yeah,
she had a boyfriend who was a sculptor, and she hobbled after him. She wasn't going to let him out of her sight.
Oh.
And then in the night, sometimes we'd get a knock on our door, and it would be somebody with some problems wanting to talk about it.
That car accident? Remember that?
The
kids got in a car accident?
Yeah, but that's...
Well, I was going to say then,
stuff.
if Jack was the father, Marilyn, you were the mother, right?
I already had 4 children.
You didn't need any more children.
Well, I was there, and I'm a good listener. And sometimes it was just hard. Some of these students hadn't been out of the country, out of the state.
Homesick?
Well, 10 and a half weeks, no cell phones, no computers back then, That was a long time.
But they had problems, and they would come to Marilyn with problems that they would never come to me for.
Well, they were mostly girls with boy problems, things like that. And then my children made friends with Italians, and that was a double-edged sword too, because they thought they were college kids, and they weren't. But it was adventure raising children over there. And they went to the Italian schools.
I was going to say, I've read that all children went
for about 3 months.
I had a grant to stay after the program returned to the States. We stayed on and put our children into Italian schools. And their friends, they developed them. They have friends, same friends today.
That visit here. In fact, there were 3 18-year-olds that came, because every time we left, we said, "No, y'all got to come see us. Y'all come," like Southerners say. And then the parents got together and they said, "Well, let's send our 18-year-olds over since they're through with high school and they can stay with the Kehoes." And I thought, well, that's wonderful, thinking it would be about a couple of weeks. And it turned out to be 5 or 6 weeks. We were calling every friend we had, and Ken took them to the racetracks, and then somebody took them to New York. But they're still friends, and a lot of them have businesses now in Cortona. They've grown up.
Well, it's just home. It's home. What a wonderful experience. Talk then about the John D. Kehoe Cortona Center. and how did it come about?
Well, I think it was, we had to have a place permanent, because when you have easels, you have tools, you have equipment, projectors. You know, we had a little art school right there. And you had to have a permanent site, because you couldn't be dragging these things back and forth. And I will say this, that a lot of the equipment we purchased, because we ran the program efficiently, that any surplus would go back into the program to buy another piece of equipment. And that sustained us, because the summer program eventually entered into 2-semester program and then full year-round. So there's a lot of needs you have to fulfill, and when you're not receiving money from the university in terms of appropriations, you have to generate that income from your own activities.
So there's certainly a logistical end to things. It's not all art and beauty
No. Well, I had to buy a van, because so much of the needs we had, I couldn't ask the city to do it. So we bought a van, which we used for field trips, for taking kids to the hospital, for going on various expeditions, you know. We had a little self-contained community ourselves.
What an opportunity, and what a joy and a challenge in all that. As I looked at the website the other day and looked at the range of classes that an individual student can take and the breadth of that, it's beyond painting and sculpture. It's amazing to me. In fact, I think there were winemaking, or am I right?
Right.
And I can't pronounce the OEN word, whatever that word is. It means winemaking. But just the breadth of it. How many people come to Cortona these days? I know you started with, what, 70 people maybe in
39.
39.
39 in 1970, and it's in the thousands have been through the program at this point.
Yeah. And also keep in mind that we added environmental design that became part of the program. And they use we had private estates open to our students, so they could go through it and see the design of the gardens. We had a relationship too, where we had landscape architects from Italy that come and give lectures to our students. We had artists that come to Emilio Pucci, the famous
designer.
He was a graduate of Georgia.
He would come to our program and give a lecture, and he also interned students at his boutique in Florence. So we had a constant going on back and forth.
Just how wonderful. How did you recruit the students to begin with?
Well, first we did it on
summer.
campus, just by going to all the classes and telling them they had this opportunity. And there were other programs going primarily to Central America that the art school offered, but by and large it was just trying to explain to students this was a rare opportunity. And then I started traveling the state of Georgia, going to other state institutions, to Valdosta, to Augusta, to West Georgia. And so we started to broaden our students.
Nobody had heard of Cortona, and they thought it was Cortina, the ski resort, and in fact, some mail came there it would go there first, but people kept saying, we've never heard of this. Is it like Rome or Florence? And
it didn't take long, though, did it?
Word of mouth started, and it kind of multiplied.
How many, and I know you all have not been involved there directly for a while, but what is the most number that can come during a course? How many people can you
might
look
know
at?
That.
I think about 85, I think. I think the Kehoe Center will
will hold.
Will hold about 85. I think they have beds for 85
Yeah,
students.
I think you're right. Yeah.
And then faculty rent
But the interesting thing that we had students come from all over the world. We've had from Canada,
South
we've had
America.
students from Japan, we've had students from South America. It was interesting how that word spread, and they all added a lot of pluses to the program. And keep in mind, we went through that terrible period where it was very unstable in Italy, and kneecapping, shooting people of other parties. But yet Cortona was isolated from that, and it seemed to have we even have the Pope come to Cortona and bless all the students in the main piazza.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. I remember his Pope mobile coming up the mountain, and everybody kneeling and praying and coming into the main square. And he even blessed by name the students from the University of Georgia.
Y'all really could pull some strings. How did you recruit faculty?
Well, at first I had because Kehoe, they said, you got a loser there. Nobody's going to pay good money to go to a little hick town in Italy. And so we couldn't get anybody. Rodney Shaw, who was the first faculty member, who was an art historian, but then I had to hire 2 Italians to teach other courses,
Painting.
And then I taught sculpture as well, directed the program. And then eventually we had people that would line up to go to teach.
I was getting ready to say, I would think there would be a stampede after a while.
Yeah. So as the program built up a reputation of a serious program, you've got to keep in mind, and I'm not being critical, but I am, that there's a lot of programs, especially in Rome, that are really not very serious. The students have very little responsibility. Their exhibition was terrible. I mean, I kept track because there's an association of American colleges and universities in Rome, in Italy, which we belong to, and you have contact with these other directors and other instructors, and you see what's going on in their programs, and Georgia's program is head and shoulders above all of them.
Well, that's what I hear.
Yeah.
Do you think we're prejudiced?
Pardon?
Do you think we're prejudiced?
Sure, we're prejudiced.
But it's true.
It's absolutely true.
Talk about some of your favorite anecdotes. We were hearing some of those earlier. Some of the favorite memories that you have of the program.
Well, the one is of a young lady who was an older student, and she met this Italian who wanted to marry her. And he followed her from Rome, where she met him, all the way to Cortona, and coming back week after week, pleading with her, please marry me. And of course, she was a little scared and frightened and wouldn't take the invitation. We've had other students that I think have met people and truly had fallen in love and are now living in Italy. We have several couples there. And
raising children.
And have children.
And we say if you look on the bottom of the child's foot, it says made in Italy. And we are responsible.
Oh. What about, and I guess not only were students interested in native Italians, but that students fell in love with each other. That was part of the joy and part of the challenge too. I hear you say, Marilyn.
Sure.
That was part of the discussions they had with you late at night, right?
Sometimes.
Well, when you're going to classes with students and you're having dinner with your fellow students, you see them in all aspects, and so the total personality is revealed. You know, you can't hide many things.
That's true. Marilyn, talk a little bit about having 4 children, going back to your being the mother of the Cortona program.
Well, of all countries to have children in, Italy's the best, because I said anybody should come back as an Italian baby, because they are, especially boys, they're just prams and worshipped until they're 40 years old, you know. But and my children, well, they were good travelers because we had done traveling before that.
Tell us how old your children were when you started. I know you said you had an 8-month-old baby, I think, when you first went.
Was 8 months, and then we jump up to my daughter that you just met was 10. And then there were 2 boys in the middle who were 8 and 6 or something like that. I can't remember. But
so 4 children, 10 and under to begin with.
Mm-hmm. And it was really kind of fun because he would go teach, and then we would make a journey into the town, because the first we lived in the town, didn't we? And I had the stroller. I had the wine and water hooked to the stroller, and we would shop, and that was how I learned my food Italian, which is still my best vocabulary, wine and food Italian. And the Italian children were very friendly. I mean, maybe in a big city you wouldn't find this kind of acceptance, but in the small town you did. And the parents, we go to the park, and that's how I'd meet parents, and the children would play. There's a beautiful park in Cortona designed by the French. That's a real place to meet, and there's a lot of walking done, so you're outside a lot.
And that passeggiata was sort of a formal way that all the town people would go up and down the main street.
You have coffee. You every day you would be out and mix with people in the town.
It's the pace of life was a little different.
Yeah,
it
totally.
was.
Is that right?
And each day you'd shop for the meal you were going to have that day and get whatever was fresh, or you'd go to the market, and a lot of time is spent, you know, cooking. I think we had one of the few washing machines in town, but it emptied in the bathtub, and if you were taking a bath, that wasn't so good. But we did.
I was going to say, I don't know how with 4 children you could live without a washing
well,
machine.
several of the young faculty wives, when they came, they said, "Oh, it's exhilarating. I go to there was a little place, we called it the laundromat. It was stone basins up on the hill, and they would
wash their clothes
wash their, and after a week or 2, they said, this sucks. This is not exciting anymore. So we would, you know, there was a laundromat they would use and all. But what you might want to edit this, that I'm going to tell you now, and I'm glad you can do it. But if I ever wrote a book, it would be Georgia President's Underwear and what they wore, because we entertained 3 presidents, starting with, oh my gosh, I can't even, Davison. Fred Davison. They came several times, once with their children, and Diane said, I said, "Is there anything y'all need?" She said, "Can I just do my laundry? We've been traveling around." And I said, "Sure." And she left it, and I did it. And we didn't have a dryer, so we hung it out on the terrace. That was one. My sons were the same, and so we had to kind of sort them out. They were tidy-whities, I think. Then next was, who was the next president? Knapp, Chuck Knapp. And Lynn wanted the same thing, and then the last was Michael Adams.
So you spent time washing laundry?
Well, not all, but I thought it was rather funny, and I don't think that doesn't need to be in. I don't want Michael Adams.
Well, I told Jack that that everybody I ever worked for at the University of Georgia had a reason that they had to go to Cortona for some, course. You know, this was part of the work.
Research.
But had to go. Jack, talk to us a little bit about the history of Cortona in itself. My understanding was it was an Etruscan town. Can you talk to us a little?
Well, even dates earlier than that. There were tribes that existed before the Etruscans, and then these tribes then merged together, which developed the Etruscans. Now, the Etruscans, of course, were highly artistic, especially their pottery, their tombstones. They were very advanced. They had a written language, which was very unique at that time. And then they always seemed to locate in high ground so they could defend themselves. And but they would spread out all around. and develop a real ambitious agricultural programs where they could trade with other different areas and people, and very sophisticated, tremendous warriors. They were feared throughout even northern Italy and part of southern Europe. They would travel that far. They were seafarers, so they, especially in the Mediterranean, they explored colonies. There was even a guess maybe they even predated some of the Greeks that went that far. So they have a rich background, and Cortona had the evidence of a lot of that artwork that represent their culture. So that was the beginning, and then so many other things that developed from then.
Would it be like, and this may be trivializing it, but would it be like those folks down in South Georgia maybe or around Atlanta who are plowing in their fields and they hit something and it's a Confederate mini ball or something? So were there
Oh yeah, well,
all kinds of artifacts that were
but
turned.
the trouble is then, according to Italian law, you had to report that. So there was an undercover business of these found objects never getting recorded. They would be sold off to private individuals. And we don't know how many of those artifacts got away and are not recorded. There's a thriving market in it, amazingly so.
What about burial sites and such?
Well, they were already early on exploited. They were all over the Cortona, below in the valley. They would have tombs that were dug up and the valuables taken out and things scattered around. So there was a lot of robbery of that type of thing.
But there's a lot of surviving things in the Etruscan Museum. You could spend a whole day in there. There's a beautiful lamp that a farmer found in his field not far from Cortona that's hanging, a bronze lamp. It's perfect shape. And there are two wonderful museums in Cortona.
Yeah, so we take full advantage. And by the way, the city gave the students free passes so they could go into those museums anytime, day or night.
Sketch and study and look.
Yeah.
That's a wonderful relationship you all had with the town gown relationship. There may be the best I've ever heard. So, talk a little bit about what a regular day would be like, just a normal day in the Cortona program for the student or the faculty person. What would you do? Now, I know you were running things, Jack, so it might not have been regular for you.
You might know
you
better.
Can talk more about that.
As far as times of classes and all.
Well, I typically had, the times I've been there, I had 8 o'clock classes. And then, so you get up in the morning and you'd have your breakfast and walk up the hill, which is a good way to start the day. And then teach your class. And then after that, Ann would come up and we would just sit in the studio and draw and have lunch. She'd buy lunch down at Molosini's and bring lunch up, and we'd have lunch, and then I'd teach an afternoon class and then go back down to the apartment and take a nap.
Sit down on the terrace
Take a nap
and
about
drink
3
a little
o'clock, take a
wine.
nap about 3
Like the
o'clock,
Italians
and,
do. The shops close.
A little siesta, then wake up and go to dinner. And then spend the evening on the town in Cortona, which you'd be sitting around in coffee houses or little bars.
But you guys did a lot of work too, because you were part of the exhibition when we had the students.
Yeah, there'd be work in there because it was really it's a wonderful place to work because the light is terrific, the air is beautiful, the windows are wide open, you've got swallows flying around. This breeze is coming through. You're looking down into the Chiana Valley. It's
No traffic.
There's no traffic. It's a completely contemplative, wonderful location. So it's a terrific place to work. So yes, I find that I get a lot more work done in 2 months in Cortona than I get done the rest of the year. Just get a lot done over there.
And you put that beautiful book together.
There's also a little anecdote that's interesting, is that one of our students loved to go on his own just walk out and go across the country and doing sketching and watercolors. And then finally I get a message that the student is saying, this farmer saw me doing some watercolor on his land, and he took me, invited me to have meal with his family. Now they won't let me go. They want to have me stay for dinner. Come get me, come there.
Liked you too much.
And also down, I will say, down in the, we had at that time we didn't have our own foundry, so we would have a foundry down at Kamachia there. And the founder there only did, utilitarian castings. But when we asked him, could we come down and have the students do artwork? And he was totally open. He never charged us extra. He just charged us for the metal. And that's how we started our bronze casting program before we had our own foundry. And that couldn't have been necessary. And he would provide all the wine.
Jack, talk a little bit about the respect that the Italians have for the Americans in relationship to the Second World War. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, especially Cortona, because it was freed by Americans and British troops that came through there. And there's some wonderful photographs that they have up in the City Museum of the troops and the tanks arriving into the square of Cortona. And I think that also they would always come up to you and say, do you know my cousin in Chicago? Thinking that we all knew each other, but they were very family orientated in the sense of, where is your mother? What's your father from? And all that kind of, they would always ask questions about family relationships.
Tell about going to Arezzo, to the cemetery.
Oh, that's a very moving experience, because they have a beautifully maintained cemetery in a town north of us where all the Allied dead are buried. And they have this major celebration each year where, even though they don't know who the person is, there will always be a bouquet of flowers on the gravesite. And so the Italians do that in honor of the people that freed them, from World War II. And and they'll have troops from all of the Allied divisions will come there. Belgium, Dutch, British, American. It talks a lot about a united world. If we ever could reach that point where we could be united in all our problems, it would be wonderful.
That may be a good place to stop. You're exactly right. Well, let me close by saying that Dr. Michael Adams has stated that the University of Georgia's Cortona program is one of the jewels in the university's crown, offering not only a world-class art program in the summer, but also an unexcelled exposure to the liberal arts throughout the year. And what a pleasure and a privilege to have had the opportunity to learn more about that jewel from its founders. Thank you all for letting us visit today.
Thank you for visiting us.